Time to paint some chrome. So when it comes to painting chrome, you have two choices. You got an etch primer, you can go with the etch primer system, or you can go with the epoxy system. I always go with the epoxy system. So the biggest difference between etch and epoxy is that etch primer and body filler don't always get along. So in the things that I do, restoration type work, where I'm working with a lot of different layers, I'm doing body filler, primers, all this stuff, the epoxy sticks to all that sticks to epoxy. Etch primer, body filler, there's a little question there. Sometimes you can have issues. So I just leave the etch primer out of the equation altogether. Hardly ever use it. Now, if you're painting something like this bumper, where you're gonna sand it, etch it, seal it, paint it, all in one process, the etch primer works pretty good. Now, if I use epoxy, it's the same thing, but I cut out one step. I don't have an etch primer and a sealer. I just have the epoxy doing it all. So that makes the epoxy a little bit faster, one less product to use. So overall, I just like the epoxy system better. There's a couple other reasons as well. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. Let's get to sanding on this thing, see what it takes to cut it. Let's start with some 180 and see how it cuts. It's not bad, it's cutting pretty good. Still a little shine to it, so we'll need to spend some more time with the 180, or maybe go with a coarser grit. Let's try some 120 and see how that looks. One thing to think about when you start sanding this is whether or not those scratches are going to show in the paint that you put on there. Now, if I go with 80 grit and I get a big scratch in it, I use a metallic paint. Metallic can lay down on those scratches, and then you see sand scratches in the finished product. We don't want that. So we want to make sure that we don't cut it too bad. This being solid white, I'll probably go with 120 instead of 180, but I usually like to get the biggest scratch I can get away with and not see it for adhesion purposes. Bigger scratch is better. I think I'm just going to use the 150. So just to sand and shoot this thing, then we'll go with the 150 grit. Seems to cut it good scratch. If I was going to prime this, I'd be using 80 for sure. Get a good deep cut on it, make it stick. But something like this, we're going to sand and shoot, I'm going to use 150 on it. So I jumped around with different grits. The 150 seems to be cutting the best, gets rid of the most shine. Now remember, if you're using that interface pad, it's going to kind of wrap around things and not sand in some of the areas. So you may need to take off the interface pad, just go with a straight backing pad to get into some of the places a little easier with the DA. It's whatever it takes to get it all sanded. Now I'm going over it with 120 by hand. Just want to make sure I get it scuffed everywhere. Just throwing everything at it I got, trying to get that scratch in that chrome so that the epoxy's going to stick to it. There you go, sanded, scuffed, scratched, sanded, Scotch-Brite, whatever it took to get it sanded. Nice and dull, can't see my reflection. So that's how I'm going to prep my chrome. Let's get that other side done. So here's the other reason I like to use epoxy instead of etch. I've got bare metal down there. I've also got some stuff that's got a factory E-coat or a primer on it. And I want to be able to seal everything with the same product. If I use the etch primer, it's only for bare metal. If I use epoxy, I can do it all. Be sure to read the directions on the products you're using. This epoxy requires a 15-minute induction period, meaning the period of time before when you mix it up and you spray it. So we'll give it at least 15 minutes, probably a little longer. We'll actually put it on the shaker and give it mechanical agitation. You really want to make sure that it's blended together well. I'm going to hit all this with wax and grease remover, then blow and tag it, ready to spray. Give that about 15-20 minutes to dry. We'll start the base coat. The other's getting single stage. Get all that done. This is our single stage. Layer down, got a little run starting. Lay it down, it shouldn't flow out. Turned out okay. Got a little heavy-handed with it. Maybe that one will settle out now that it's laid down. It's done. Let's get out of here. Catch y'all next time.